Hello and welcome to the Lucky Roll. We were thrilled to participate in Gen Con Online this year. One of our highlights was talking with Beth from Z-Man Games about all things Pandemic Legacy Season 0, Pandemic Rapid Response and Hot Zone, Infinity Gauntlet, and the intriguing Noctiluca. Take it away, Beth.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth from Z-Man Games, and we're going to talk about some of our newest releases today. So Z-Man Games is a studio that has actually been around since 1999, and we have published a variety of things. I've come onto the team in the last few years. Most people will probably know our biggest game, which is Pandemic. And there is actually an entire line of pandemic games, but in those, you're working together cooperatively as a team to try and find cures for 4 diseases that are threatening the world. And there's a couple other variations. We have a few standalone games that have like a historical theme instead of a scientific theme. There's also a Cthulhu one, which is a lot of fun. You're trying to stop the old ones from awakening. A couple other titles that most people should know. We have Love Letter, which I will talk about today. We have Carcassonne, which is a tile laying game, and then there's also a lot of Carcassonne games as well, and so many expansions. And then we have Citadels, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of different characters, and they each have different unique abilities, and you're trying to build districts in your city, and whoever can build the best city, of course, will win. And then, we have a variety of other, strategy games, some good family games. We have a lot of stuff that's very, very approachable. There's stuff that has a good amount of strategy, but it's easy to teach. It's easy to get someone into the game, and yeah, we're just kind of fun, cool, casual. It has affected all of the above. So work-wise, we have been working remotely since March. I'm at home right now. So yeah, we've all been working remotely. Our office is in Minnesota, and while not as bad as some places, there are definitely cases, and we're all being very cautious. So we've been able to work from home, which has been good. It's been an adjustment, but we are continuing to produce new games, continuing to push the ones that we have. There were some production delays just as some of the factories were closed down and then adjusting and trying to figure out what was going on. So there were a little bit of delays with things this year, but I think that has affected basically everyone. And then, having a game line called Pandemic during a pandemic is certainly interesting. It's one of those things where some people don't want to play it, and that's totally fine. But we've actually found that a lot of people have been talking about it, and a lot of people have been playing it even more than they were before. Some people, I think, kind of find it a little cathartic to play because, in it you are trying to save the world. And so it's a way for you to relate to what's going on and feel like you're really accomplishing something. And I know like some families have used it to try and explain to their kids like what is happening in the real world. It's not a direct correlation, but when Matt made Pandemic initially, he there are interviews online that you can read that he talks about it quite in depth, but he wanted to make it an authentic experience. He did a lot of research, and he wanted to make sure that it was, a challenging experience, but so people understand it is a challenging, reality, but that it is also something that can be beat, but you have to work together, utilize the different skills of talented people in the field in order to beat something that seems insurmountable. So a lot of people have been playing it and just having a good time at home, and I think also using it to process the reality of what we're dealing with, which is kind of unprecedented. Yeah, well, in previous years, this weekend I would be in Indianapolis. We would have a physical booth. I'd probably be running around like a maniac talking to everyone. So we definitely had to adjust that. So, normally cons are a time for us to maybe sell some early product or to make sure that people can actually have physical demos of the games. So we'll usually get, early copies of things so people can try it or have some things on a display case to show off. We often do, promotional things, like we'll give away pins or like a special card or something. And we usually just have a lot going on at the booth. So this time it was like, okay, how do we translate that to something that's virtual? So, we did a few different live streams. I did a couple yesterday. We talked about the art and development of Pandemic Legacy. Matt and Rob did a panel. We also did a playthrough of Infinity Gauntlet on camera and, just tried to answer questions and interact with people. And then, we still made a pin. We just have that available as a limited quantity thing in our web store. And then we were able to try and make the tabletop simulator versions of things so that people could still try the game. It's just a different format. And, there is some differences between virtual and physical, of course. But one of the nice things about the virtual is that it does remove the location barrier for some people. Like people were able to tune into our live stream from around the world. Like we had some people watching from Australia, and some of those people might not be able to take the time or afford to come to a Gen Con like that's in Indianapolis. So that aspect of it is actually definitely a benefit. I really like the physical in-person cons personally. So I'm hoping they'll come back, but it may be that we kind of learn from this and maybe we still have some virtual elements in the future just in combination with the physical. So first game we're going to talk about is Pandemic Hot Zone North America. So if you're familiar with base game Pandemic, this still has the same gameplay. It's still a cooperative game. You're still trying to find the cures to diseases. It is a much smaller package. So this version is only $20, plays 2 to 4 players, and it plays in about 30 minutes. So it's really good for like a quick lunch game. Good for like a warm up before you play other games. It's great to just keep in your car or throw in a backpack. So you'll see in this next image that the board, instead of being a global map like regular Pandemic, it's actually a zoomed in focused map on North America. And Matt did a really great job of streamlining the gameplay. So there's a few things that are different. Instead of 4 diseases, you're trying to find the cure for 3 diseases. Instead of having to trade in 5 cards to find the cure, you trade in 4. There are only 4 characters instead of like 7. And then when you are moving about, you don't have the like hopping from research station to research station because there's only one research station that's printed on the board. It's in Atlanta. So anytime that you're playing and you're trying to get the cure, you have to go back to Atlanta. The other thing that's different is this version has 3 epidemic cards, and only 3, and you'll use them every single time when you are preparing the player deck. So the thing that ends up changing the difficulty level is actually something called crisis cards. So crisis cards are great because they provide a really interesting different challenge every time. I believe there are 7 cards. And when you're setting up the player deck, when you want to use the crisis cards, you'll either shuffle 1 or 2 into like the 3 sections of the deck. And when those show up, you don't know what it's going to be. So it makes it a really interesting new challenge once you want to up that difficulty level. The Hot Zone games are actually going to be the start of a new series. So North America is first, but we are going to do other regions. And every single one is going to have its own little twist of gameplay. So it's still going to be, very familiar gameplay of Pandemic. But Matt's been working on different elements to make sure that each one has something a little different. And each one will also have different characters. And there'll be some mix and match elements. So if you have more than one copy, you may be able to use the different characters or use some different event cards and kind of mix them together. So we are working on the next one now. So of course, this is the big one. So Pandemic Legacy Season 0. So this is the third and final installment of the trilogy. A lot of people expected it to be Season 3, but it is actually Season 0. So Season 0 is a prequel. It's set back in the 1960s during the Cold War era. And players are medical experts that the CIA has recruited to help them do some field work. So you get a cover alias, you travel the globe, you do, missions. It's really got that like spy thriller vibe. And because it is a campaign game, you of course get a ton of gameplay out of it. So there is a built-in prologue that you can play multiple times because some of the mechanics are a little different than regular Pandemic or the other Legacy games. So Matt and Rob included the prologue that can be played over and over. It doesn't have Legacy components, but that means the bare minimum you're going to get 13 sessions at least, probably more. The other thing that's a little different is instead of being like a complete success or a complete fail when you're playing a month, you can actually get an adequate rating, and that means that there are usually multiple objectives each month. And so sometimes maybe you finish one objective, but you don't finish the other objective in time. So maybe you would get an adequate rating. You would move on to the next month, but maybe the CIA either, admonishes you for not doing a good job, or they decide you'll need a little extra help and give you some extra tools. So the narrative is really built into the gameplay elements. Another thing that's different is the objectives, depending on whether you succeed or fail, will actually give you different story pieces. So there's a really big debrief book that's full of secrets. Don't read it until you're told to. But the objective, whether it says that you failed or succeeded, it'll tell you a different entry to read. So maybe you fail and you read debrief book entry 102. But you succeed and you read debrief entry 140. Those will tell you different story pieces. So everyone's going to have a pretty different experience playing the game. So let me show off the board here. So this is a beautiful game. We really put a lot of work into making sure it felt really authentic to the time period, and our graphic designer did a ton of research on like old archived files from like the CIA and advertisements from that time period. So there's a lot of really rich visuals in this game. As I said, you'll get multiple sessions. Like typical Legacy games, there are stickers and things that you'll add to the board. There's hidden elements. There are, boxes included in the box that you open only when told to. So there's a lot of things that end up stacking onto each other. One of my favorite pieces is the passport. So the kind of green thing in the bottom corner, that is a passport. So every player gets their own passport. And in it, you have multiple pages that end up letting you create different aliases. So at the beginning of the game, you start with a temporary alias for the prologue, and then you get your passport book, and you're able to create an alias for the Allied affiliation, the neutral, and the Soviet. And it's super fun because you get to like sticker different attributes on them. So it's like everyone will pick like a base face, and then you put that into the passport. And then there's like hair, clothing, glasses, facial hair, all kinds of crazy things that you can put onto the person to customize them. And then you can give them a fun name. And as you play the game, those aliases will help you do different things because you can flip back and forth between them depending on whether, maybe you want to do something that only the Soviet alias can do. Because you'll also pick up assets and items and assign those to each of the aliases. So sometimes you can be really strategic as you're playing to choose to switch to one of the other aliases so that you're able to use, an asset that only that alias has, which is just, it's super fun having the aliases. It was definitely one of our favorite parts. So another thing that's a little different in the game You have teams that you assemble, which are little vans that are on the board, and they also have an affiliation. You can form an allied, neutral, or Soviet team. And the teams are very necessary to complete objectives, but they can also help you take care of the agents that are on the board. So the little red figures, those are the thing that will spread across the board as you flip threat cards. And you have to neutralize the agent sometimes as an action, because if you ever run out of agent pieces and can't place those on the board, that is a lost condition. And so, when you're neutralizing an agent, you're just like blowing their cover or doing some, counter espionage, but then that'll remove those pieces from the board. And the teams are able to help do that, because an action that you can do is to actually move the teams from city to city. And if they're left in a city that matches their affiliation, they're able to take out the agents that are left in that city as well. So in a way, it almost gives you another player. So like you might be doing some stuff all the way over in Asia with your pawn, but maybe you left a team in South America and they're able to help kind of take care of the agents there. So that's super fun and a really interesting extra strategic element in the game. So some of that was a little before my time, but from what I understand the history of it, they did one. Of course, season 1 ended up being wildly successful. So it was kind of, unprecedented new waters to try, because legacy games were not as big of a thing back then as they are now. And I think that before 1 was published, I think they had already kind of been talking about the fact that they would like to do some more, because there is plenty of story to tell. But it was a little dependent on how does the first one go. First one went so well, of course, that then that really cemented, like, yes, we should do more. And I think at that point they had already decided that 2 more made sense to make it a trilogy. We chatted a little bit about this in our art panel the other day, but Sam, who's our managing art director, he's been around with the company for a long time, and he remembers, I think he said it was back in like 2016, like Matt and Rob came to the office and they were already talking about season 0 at the time. They already knew that they wanted it to be a bit more historical and, set before to kind of like lead into the other elements. So it's something that's been in the works for quite a while. It's kind of a different way of thinking. There are definitely some extra challenges. That having multiple objectives does make it an interesting balancing act at times, because, at least like when you were focused on just curing 4 diseases, like, yes, there are 4 diseases, but like the actions of curing those are the same. Whereas with the objectives in season 0, some of those objectives have different requirements. So it's a little bit more of a balancing act to decide, like, okay, do we definitely try and push and try and get both objectives? We're literally running out of cards, so we're running out of time. So like, what can we accomplish? Which one do we care about more? Or sometimes you might need to take a risk. Like sometimes the objective might have you needing to identify a target in a city, but maybe you don't know which city it is. And so maybe you have it narrowed down to like, okay, I think it's these 2 cities, but I'm not sure which. And so you might need to take a risk and guess. And like, if you have teams that can go in both cities, then you've covered your bases. But maybe you have 3 cities left, it could be, and you only have 2 teams. Then okay, do you go ahead and try and do the action, and like maybe you don't get it. So there's a couple new elements in it that are definitely different and do provide new challenges. There's also a little bit of a different method of thinking about economy of cards. So like when you're flying, if you fly with a card that's an allied card, you actually can keep the card instead of having to discard it. So that's really nice. Like maybe you have London, London's an allied city, and like maybe you need to get into a Soviet city, but you can't. So you use the London card to fly to London, and then you walk into like the next city that you need to get to. So travel's a little different, and thinking about how you're spending your cards is a little different. So it's definitely challenging. But I mean, I found it really, really fun. I think it might be my favorite of the three, actually. So Rapid Response was a game that did release initially last year. It started out as a Target exclusive, but now it's got a full wide release. And this is a standalone game, kind of set in the pandemic universe, so it does have some of the like science elements. And it is a real-time game. So the board is a specialized cargo plane that your crew is on, and you're trying to use the special machinery to create crates of supplies that cities around the world need. So there are custom dice that they're really pretty, actually. So everyone gets their own colored set of dice, and on their turn, they would shake those up and roll them. And then you can do different actions with them. And kind of Yahtzee style rules, you can re-roll multiple times. So you end up rolling your dice a total of 3 times on your turn. But you can like pull dice aside and save them if you roll a certain symbol that you want. And the dice will let you move from room to room in the board. They'll let you fly the plane around the edge of the board. They'll let you start the machinery to make crates. And since it's real time, it's a pretty quick game. So there's a sand timer running, and anytime you run out of the sand, you lose one of those purple time tokens, flip it over, and if you don't have any time tokens left, then you lose. But if you're able to deliver to all of the cities that you flipped in time, then you win. There's similarly to Hot Zone, there are crisis cards in this, and so again, that's something that can ramp up the difficulty. This you can also ramp up the difficulty just by adding more cities to the deck. So I believe that when you start out, I think base level difficulty is like 4 cities. So you don't know what city is going to get flipped, because when you do set up, you'll shuffle the cards and just pick the 4 or 5 or however many you're doing for your difficulty. And then you flip those, and if you can deliver in time to all of those, you win. But each city has different requirements of what they need. So you kind of have to like flip it and quickly assess, and then try and work together to figure out what's the best way to try and make supplies. It is cooperative, just like other pandemic games, and everyone has their own unique character ability. So some people are better at flying the plane, some people are better making supplies. So there are multiple role cards, and it's a ton of fun. It's definitely a frantic game being real time, but it is super fun, and I love this one. So then we have base game Love Letter, which also did release last year, but this is our new version of the game. So it still comes in a bag, but we upped the player count. It was originally 2 to 4, but now we have made the player count 2 to 6. And we updated the art. We added 2 new characters. So it's still the quick card game that people know and love. It's still ultra portable. It fits in a tiny bag. Very affordable, $12. And it's still, you draw a card, you play a card. You do what the character ability says. But we were really happy to do this new edition and do some new art and add some new characters. So that one was a super fun project. But leading off of that, we were able to do our first licensed Love Letter game. So Infinity Gauntlet, a Love Letter game, is a love letter game that is set in the Marvel universe. It does keep some core elements of Love Letter, but it is also different. You will still draw a card and play a card, and it's still, a very portable card game. Also comes in a bag, also 2 to 6 players. But in this one, it's actually a 1 versus many mechanic. So definitely a different way to play. So one player has a deck of cards so that they take on the role of the Mad Titan Thanos. And the other players have a deck that they share, so they are the heroes trying to stop Thanos. And each deck has, their own sets of characters, and they have similar card abilities. So in the hero deck, you'll have things like Spider-Man, who's the 1. He's very similar to the guard ability. in regular love letter, where you get to guess a number, and if the person's holding that number, it knocks them out. What it discards that card. The one nice thing about this game is no one's actually out of the game. So the way that the heroes win is there's a life tracker card that kind of tracks the health, and the heroes will win if they can knock Thanos' health down to 0. But Thanos is similarly trying to knock the hero's health down to 0. Thanos can also win if he finds all 6 Infinity Stones and then snaps. So Thanos actually has 2 ways to win. But because the heroes are all working together, they're just focused on trying to stop Thanos. And because there's a health tracker, like, no one's actually out. So if you have a card and it gets defeated, you just draw another card and you're still in the game. Whereas regular love letter, if you were knocked out, you were out until like that round finished. Infinity Gauntlet, you just keep going. So, gosh, this game is so fun. I love this game. So one of the things that's also a little different is you have fighting in this. So a couple cards will allow you to fight, and that means that you compare cards with Thanos, and the higher numerical value wins. But one thing that you can do is you can get power tokens, which are those little red +2 tokens down at the bottom of this graphic. And power tokens are a thing that then on your next fight, it just adds to like the printed numerical value on your card. You can have multiple power tokens, but you can only use 1 per battle. And when you have it, you do have to use it. But sometimes that can push it over the edge and give you a win, which is great. It's super quick. It's a really good back and forth. We did a ton of play testing to make it balanced. So the Thanos health will scale depending on how many players are playing. And yeah, this game's great. I love this game. So this one should be available pretty widely early September. Noctiluca. So this one was a late release last year, but it's from Shem Phillips. And we do now have a tabletop simulator version of this game up for people to try. There's also a tabletop simulator version of Hot Zone North America, and we do have a spoiler-free demo available of Pandemic Legacy Season 0. That is just the demo, and it is spoiler-free. It's like its own thing that we created, so it won't even like spoil the prologue. But all 3 of those are available on Tabletop Simulator for people to try out. So Noctiluca is a 1 to 4 player game. And in it, there are dice that you will shake up and put up on the board. And those represent the Noctiluca, which are these little like bioluminescent creatures. And you are trying to safely collect them from the water and put them in jars and deliver them to grateful healers who will use their healing properties. Now, the way that you do that is everyone has their own diver pawns. And depending on how many players are playing, you just divide the pawns equally. They're all the same color. So everyone has the same amount of pawns. And you dive in from the edges of the shore, which are those little brown spots around the water. And you'll pick which spot you want to put your pawn on, place them, and then you'll dive in a straight line. So you'll always have 2 options from the shore, either dive this way or this way. And you'll call out a number. And any number Noctiluca that is in that straight path that you called out. So if you call out maybe a 6 and there's like a blue 6 and a purple 6 and a green 6, maybe there are 2 green 6s, you'll pick up those dice along that straight path and then put them into the jars in front of you. And as you can see, there are multiple different jar cards. You'll always have 2 in front of you and then be able to get more as you complete a jar. But you can take the Noctiluca, put them in either of your jars. If you ever have extra Noctiluca that don't fit in your jar, they pass to the next player. And if that player can take them, they put them in their jar. So it's kind of an interesting, you have to do an interesting analysis as you're looking at like, okay, what do I want to pick up? Like, yeah, if I call out 6, I'm going to get 5 dice, but I can only take 3 of those. Is that really the best choice? And so you'll continue playing, and put the Noctiluca in jars. And then as you complete jars, you'll turn those in. And there's 3 jar types, and then there are tokens that you'll take. They start at a 2 value and go down, I believe, to 8. And as you collect those, you will get at the end the point value printed on those tokens, but also at the end, you'll see who has the most of each type of jar, and any tokens that are left over get flipped over and then are just bonus single points. So like if I had the most of the red jar, maybe I had 4 of the red jar tokens that I'd claimed, and everyone else only had like 2 or 1. I would get any of the tokens that are left flipped over as single bonus points. You will also, at the beginning, everyone gets dealt a secret Noctiluca card. So on the back of the kind of reference scorecard there, each one has a different illustration of the Noctiluca. So maybe my favorite Noctiluca is the green Noctiluca. That means at the end of the game, any jars that I completed that had a green Noctiluca space like printed on it will also give me bonus points. So there's a lot of different ways to score points. But it's like a pretty chill game. You know, there's definitely some analyzing you have to do as you try and decide like which dice to pick up and what's like the optimal move so you don't give your opponents a bunch of dice. But it's a lot of fun. You play 2 rounds. There is an included solo mode. So on the back of the board, there are numbers printed in the water, and you're actually playing against the Tempest. So there's an included black die that you roll that, and then dice get removed off the board. So you're trying to save them before the Tempest gets them. So we have a website, zmangames.com. We also have a Facebook, a Twitter, an Instagram. We're definitely very active on social media these days. That is a great method of communication as everyone is virtual. But like we'll post, articles on our website. We actually have a developer diary about Infinity Gauntlet going up pretty soon. So that'll kind of give a bit more of a behind the scenes look at the game. And that's where we post our game announcements. That's where we'll post, articles looking into the gameplay of how something works. And we do share those to social, but the source is always the main Z-Man website.
Lucky Roll is the home of the best board game reviews, news, competitions, and discussions. We cover everything from the game of life to Gloomhaven, so don't miss out. Subscribe now to join the fun.